Hello everybody, welcome back. We are continuing our game plan series for Tien. This was for the game BumbleRumble. In the last episode, we introduced all of the units for Tien. We're doing our nation analysis. Now we're going to go into the commanders and the mages. So let's get started. So we get a scout, average scout, nothing special here. Interestingly, we also get a spy, not an assassin, but a spy, the Imperial consort. So these are kind of super scouts. They have much more stealth. The spy ability can be used in sort of in capitals. You can try to instill uprisings. It can be a fun gimmick to play with, but they're 2 recruitment points, so it's either that or a mage, right? So you're not going to be spamming a lot of these guys out early on. However, spies can find magic sites. They can tell you what throne a throne is. So in the early game, it's not a bad idea to have a couple of these and go scout out the thrones to see which ones are valuable. So that's something to keep in mind. In terms of non-mages, there's another special unit here called the Eunuch. The Eunuch is a really interesting unit, pretty unique to Tien. So it's just like a very cheap commander, 35 gold, 40 leadership, so he can be used to ferry troops around. But he has, so first of all, tax collector, what does that do? If your provinces are cut off from your capital and don't have a fort in them, normally they wouldn't contribute any income to your empire. But if you have a tax collector, sorry, I said can't be traced to your capital, but in fact it's to any fort. But if you have this guy in the province, then you'll still get the income. Honestly, this rarely comes into play, but defense organizer is really nice. So defense organizer increases the PD in a province by 2 every turn for free until you get up to 19. This is really, really cool. You're going to end up with 19 PD in all of your province for free. When you hit your first war, that is really going to piss your opponent off, who's trying to raid you with small raiding parties, and every fight they have to bring a significant army, because 19 PD is like a decent-sized army. And especially if you supplement it with like a few of your own units, a few of your own mages. This is really cool, and they're super cheap. So you can make a few of these in the early game, use them to build your forts, just move ferry troops around, increase your PD everywhere. Really useful unit. Okay, let's move on. Our commander is a really good commander. It is a cavalry, and he has 80 leadership. I mean, what else could you ask for, right? I guess he's not going to die because he's actually pretty buff, right? And he has a bow, so you can just have him, you can set his orders to fire instead of just hold, and do nothing. So he can actually contribute to the battle in some way. A very good commander unit. The downside, it takes 41 resources, so, that's going to cut into your ability to recruit other units. But, I mean, really, we can't complain. This is a very strong unit. Okay, let's look at the priests. We have 2 priests, a holy 1 and a holy 2. So that's really nice. Holy 2 is pretty much good enough. Only a few nations have holy 3 recruitables, so having holy 2 is really good. Plus, these guys have fortune teller and bringer of fortune. So fortune teller basically can cancel bad luck events, and then bringer of fortune will increase the chance that you're going to have good fortune events. So this unit basically makes it easier to take misfortune scales, because they're going to cancel out some of the effects of misfortune scales. Now, in the early game, you're not probably going to be massing these guys because there's no reason to mass holy 2 units. But you might end up having a few because you needed them to bless your guys, or you needed, to build some temples. But they're not too expensive because they're sacred and they only cost 70 gold. And having a few of these around your empire, which you're going to end up having, you're going to be pushing Dominion, right, in the game anyways. So these are quite nifty. I mean, they're good priests. For a human priest, they've got a lot of really useful traits, so can't complain there. Holy 1, not really as useful. Really not at all. Okay, let's get started with the mages. So there are a few mages that we have to talk about. Let's start with this guy, the Master of the Way. In previous versions of Dominions, so this guy can be recruited anywhere. Well, as long as you have a temple and a lab, but he doesn't need a fort to be recruited. However, now in Dominions 5, everything takes 2 recruitment points. In Dominions 4, it used to be a strategy because you could just spam these guys and get a ton of them everywhere. Now, not so much. In the mid game and late game, I don't find these guys very useful. They are Holy 1 and they have, so they can bless. They have Water 1 and then a random path here. I mean, water is not terrible. You can always do, once you get to Alteration 6, you can do Frozen Heart, right? So if you happen to have built a few of these guys and you need to fight, they can be useful. It might end up with Astral, so you can use them for communions. But the problem is 135 gold, and that seems pretty expensive for this kind of shitty mage. The reality is I typically as Tien get a few of these in the early game because they're useful for building temples and labs in forts as I expand. And they can bless troops if you're expanding with blessed Sacred Cav, right? So if we're doing Red Guards, then these guys can bless your troops. So in the early game, I think it's okay to get a few of these. They'll help in your expansion. But afterwards, I don't think they're that exciting. Now we have a few other mages. We've got an apothecary and an alchemist of the 5 elements, which is kind of like the better version of the apothecary. A nature 1 mage is not very exciting. He is cheap, and he does have the disease healer ability, which is always nice. But the alchemist of the 5 elements also has disease healer, and this is a much better mage. And the reason he's a much better mage, I mean, he's a bit more expensive, but he actually has really good cross paths for forging items. So what I like to do generally is I'd like to have one of these guys in every fort. That way, they'll just passively get rid of all the diseases that you might accidentally accumulate. And these guys are very useful for just forging items. There's a lot of items that you need to forge that just take one fire, 1 earth, water, air, whatever, and cross paths with nature. And you're going to be recruiting, if you recruit enough of these guys, you're going to get some really cool cross paths. You're going to get maybe like a earth, air, you're going to get fire, whatever. Like, they're useful for crafting items, and they're not terrible researchers. So having one of these around is fine. Plus, they have supply bonus. So taking them to fight with you might help you if you're gonna go fight against like either a nation that has death scales or something like that. They're not terrible. The fact that they can alchemize is super relevant, but overall it's sort of like an okay mage. Now our cat mages have amazing path diversity. So what I said here about cross paths for forging, I guess what I'm saying is that you won't need to waste one of your big cat mage turns forging something because these guys are going to be able to handle it. That was sort of my main point. Let's move on. The Minister of Magic. This guy is pretty badass. And the reason is, so first of all, he's 65 gold for 11 research, Adept Researcher 4. Okay? This is an amazing researcher. This ratio of gold cost to research output is fantastic. There are very few mages in the game that have such a good ratio. This is so good that you can almost take drain scales, basically, and still be even if you take drain scales, your research output will be at least average, if not still superior to other nations. Not only that, but if you end up building a bunch of these guys later on, once you're done your research or in a pinch and it's an emergency, you need to fight, they actually have good paths. So a quarter of them are going to be astral mages, so they can be communion slaves. Water 1 is great for, like I said, a Frozen Heart is a totally reasonable spell. Air 1 can just spam out Phantasmal Warriors, right? Earth 1, okay, is pretty bad, right? But almost all of these are going to be moderately useful in fights, and they're just amazing researchers. So in the early game, we want to be making these guys, except if we need to be building an army for actual fighting, because these are not great fighters. I'm just saying they're not terrible if you're, stuck in a pinch, but they're amazing researchers. So that's the Minister of Magic. Okay, finally we get to the best mage. Okay, this is one of the best. I think this is a candidate for one of the best mages in the game. Or certainly in MA. It is an amazing unit. So here we go. 65 gold, Earth 1, Astral 1. I mean, what more do we need to say? This is a fantastic unit. Oh, plus he's Fortune Teller 10. So remember what I said about about this nation is really able to take misfortune scales, because you're gonna be recruiting tons of these mages, trust me. So that means that you're gonna cancel out a ton of bad events. Okay, they're old age, so that means they have more encumbrance. Who cares, right? They're communion guys anyways, so fatigue is not so much of an issue. Earth Astral is an amazing cross path. It's great in communions. I mean, just cheap Astral mages are just great anyways, right? But Earth Astral is amazing. I just cannot sort of overstate how good this mage is. Just by having a few of these guys, you can get so many important spells out. Obviously, Gifts from Heaven is an obvious thing that you can cast very early on and very effectively. But just really everything, a ton of things. A very strong unit. Earth and Astral is really a versatile path. And it's a really cheap communion mage, right? 65 gold is a very cheap mage. I mean, look, 65 gold with S1 would be a great mage. That would be a great cheap communion mage, right? But we're getting two paths in one. I mean, this is a really, really good mage. And, it's, even if he was a shitty mage, even like suppose this was, I don't know, Nature Fire, it's still 65 gold for a 9 research, which is like not terrible. Many nations do much, much worse, right? A lot of nations, they're paying 110, 120 gold for a 9 research mage. Now, of course, we have even better. If we wanted to research, we'd be doing a Minister of Magic. But this guy is, this is the main mage that we want. This is an amazing, amazing unit. So we want to be recruiting these. They're going to be the core of our mage force, because we need, them to be communion slaves. We need them to cast a few other spells. Now, to play Tien, like I think at the truly expert level, you do want to sneak in Ministers of Magic when you can, because these are like 60% more research. So you kind of want to be able to sneak these guys in. But if you think a war is on the horizon, make sure you get a whole bunch of these Geomancers up and running. Okay, let's talk about, before we talk about our last two mages, we've got two cat mages that we'll talk about in a moment. We do have a kind of sacred commander. So this is the commander version of our sacred unit. This is not often recruited. And a couple of reasons. First of all, 230 gold is not cheap. Now, Leadership 120 is definitely nice. And sometimes you might need that. And so getting a couple of these is not a terrible idea. They're sacred, so they'll take your buff. The problem is, like, it doesn't make a great thug because it's a human, so it's only got 13 hit points. So that's the big shortcoming. In spring, I guess you could use this to thug in the spring, like in one season only. They would have like 20 hit points, I think. But it feels like, how many gems are you gonna put on a unit that has 13 hit points, right? Like, it feels bad. Feels bad, man. And mainly the problem is you don't want to recruit these because you want to be recruiting your cat mages instead, which are much, much better than this guy. So unfortunately, kind of forgettable. Okay, let's talk about the cat mages. We've got two. The first is the Imperial Alchemist. So, oh my god, right? 1, 1, 1, 1, 2 plus randoms. So this is what one of the real strengths of Tien is magic diversity. With the exception of death and blood, we can do everything. So the randoms here are, this guy is going to be basically a 2 of an elemental path and 2 in nature, but randomly you might get a 3 or it could be a 3 in nature or of any of the elemental paths, or it might might have 2 different 2s. So very low paths, but great diversity. So first of all, these are amazing for a few things. These guys are great for site searching in the early game. You'll only get like the level 1s and a couple level 2s, but that's a huge portion of magic sites are level 1s or level 2s. So what I typically do is in the first year, well, I mean, once we've got another fort going, so I'm not really in the first year. I guess in the first 2 years, I'm recruiting these cat mages and sending them out to do site searching. Obviously, of course, they're great for forging, right? For forging items. In a fight, these paths, so air, water, earth, and nature, are going to be better handled by other mages, with the exception of nature. So I should say air, water, and earth. You have other mages that are going to do this better. Now, fire, the fire 2s on these guys are pretty precious. So because we're an astral nation, we can just stick a communion crystal matrix on these guys. So these paths can be as high as we need them to be with communions, right? But these are going to be, one of your only easy access to fire. So if you get a fire 2 here, that's going to be pretty precious. The other thing that they can do is if they're either built in nature 3 or if you have just make a thistle mace, then there'll be 3 nature, 1 earth with strength of Gaia. Strength of Gaia. They become 4 nature, 1 earth. And that alone, without even a communion, can take care of all the big nature buffs that you need to do. But if not, always just stick a crystal matrix on these guys, and they'll take care of all your nature and all your nature needs, and even nature earth cross paths like the resist spell at enchantment 9. And then just to top things off, they're disease healer 2, which is really nice, and they have supply bonus, so why not, right? So definitely a good mage. I end up not recruiting as many of these later on because I think the Celestial Master is better. Let's talk about him in just a moment. In this game, but these are your best nature mages, and nature is a really important path for buffing. So you might, but there are a lot of good indie nature sites. So you can get enchantresses, you can get the Nature 2 Astral 1 guys. So there are other ways to get nature covered, and if you can do that, then I would probably be spending my cap turns recruiting these guys, the Celestial Masters. So slightly more expensive, but reasonably priced for a cap mage. Okay. So a few things. First of all, also a lot of cross paths. We've got air, water, earth, astral. Our random can include nature. So we're not going to get any earth 2s, but we can get cross paths. So we can get astral nature here if we're lucky, and more randoms. These are useful because, again, we have earth astral cross paths, but now we've got water and air built in. So if you don't find any other high air, like a throne that has good air, like the astral air throne, which I actually end up finding in this game, but if I didn't, I could totally be doing fog warriors and all the big air spells using these guys and communions. Most importantly, these guys are your priests because at Holy 2 with Astral, we can communion them up to get Holy 3 and above, and so we can do Divine Blessing and Fanaticism and so on and so forth. So these are key. You need these guys in the mid-game, especially if you're going to use your Sacreds. These are the superior Cat Mage. Overall, a totally respectable Cat Mage. Again, it's Astral, so you can buff it with Communions. They're somewhat vulnerable to Magic Duel. Sorry. They're somewhat vulnerable to Magic Duel, except for the fact that typically you're going to have an army with way more Geomancers. So the chances of Magic Duel hitting your Cat Mage is pretty low. They're probably going to, if somebody tries to Magic Duel, they're going to hit your Geomancers. And their Magic Dueler is probably more expensive than 65 gold. So it's not a really good strategy to try to Magic Duel against Tien. Okay. So that does it for all the units that we can recruit. I guess there are a few more units that we should take a look at. We've got some summons. Let's summon some of these guys. So Tianchi in early age and in late age has a lot more summons than we do in MA. So a lot of people associate Tianchi with a lot of summons. By the way, we're playing with debug mod. That's why this is like this. So we have, but we do have some summons. So let me show them to you. I guess we'll make a few of them. So we've got the Celestial Servant. I'll just do a few turns. Oh, sorry, this is like a 20-player game. So yes. Okay. Celestial Hounds. Probably should have recruited a few more of these guys. So bear with me. We also could have done this in the mod inspector, I guess. Celestial Soldiers. And there's just another one I'm going to mention, which is not unique to our nation, but it is restricted to only a few nations. Here we go. I guess Herd of Buffaloes. Herd of Buffaloes is pretty nice. Oh yes, and one more. One more thing in Living Mercury. Okay. So let's take a look at these units. All right, so first of all, the Celestial Servant. So this is a very cheap Earth summon. It just takes, let's see, actually to summon it, a Celestial Servant. So this guy is very cheap and easy to summon, and it's only one Earth, and so you can, if with Imperial Geomancers, you can really spam out a lot of these guys. Now they're not great, to tell you the truth, but they are sacred, and they have 48 hit points. You know, no protection to speak of, you know, bad stats, but it's a 48 hit point sacred for one Earth gem. You know, you could do worse. Like, he's got a lot of strength. This is, I mean, I honestly didn't use these. I never end up using them, but this is like, has uses, right? Now, of course, there's gluttony, right? But so they'll, even though they don't need food, they're going to eat everybody else's food. So you do have to watch your army supply. But you can do stuff with this depending what your bless is. Like, this is, you know, this is just a good like pile of hit points if you just need a buffer, right? As Siege Chaff goes, this is not terrible. For one Earth gem, that's a lot of hit points for just one Earth gem. So not to be underestimated. And to be honest, I've probably underestimated it quite a lot. Okay, let's move on to the Celestial Hound. This one takes one air and one astral to summon, so your cat mages can do them. They're pretty nice because they're flying sacred doggies. And so they have some built-in shock resistance. They've got 2 attacks. So depending what your bless is, these guys might actually be somewhat useful. They're kind of squishy, but they can be fairly killy. This is pretty good attack stats and good damage, and they're flying. So you can definitely, you know, attack rear with these guys. Maybe make sure that you have some form of defensive buffs on them before you deploy them, because otherwise they're just going to kind of get killed. And they do take up air gems to summon. So pretty nice, a little on the squishy side, but can be great for attack rear attacks. The next one that I summoned are the Celestial Soldiers. These require air. They require a lot more air gems to summon. and you need Air 2 and Astral to summon. But these are pretty strong units. So 38 hit point size 4 unit, Sacred, with good attack and defense stats, high protection, high magic resistance, high morale, and a glaive that does 32 damage. This is a very respectable unit. In the game, I don't end up using them too much because I need my air gems for other things. But if you can get a decent air income and against certain opponents, that are using high protection units or giants or things like that, these are quite respectable units. So these are not terrible summons. The next one I wanted to bring up are the Buffalo. These guys are not unique to Tien, but only a few nations can summon them. You get 5 at a time, plus a few more if you have high nature paths for 10 nature gems. These guys are 43 hit point tramplers that go berserk. That's pretty amazing. And they happen to have 2 attacks, sure, with low attack value, but tons of damage. If you're fighting chaff like this, these guys are badass. Like trampling berserkers with 43 hit points. You hit these guys with some buffs, some protection buffs, a regen buff. That is pretty nasty. So actually, this is a pretty good summon overall. Now, you have to make sure, they have good morale and they're berserkers, but they have very low magic resistance. So they can be, beastmastered or whatever. They're vulnerable to a lot of magic shenanigans. But in terms of just trampling chaff, pretty strong units. Finally, we have the Living Mercury. This is a pretty unique summon. This is like a kind of a poison elemental, if you will. High hit points, has a poison cloud, and 3 crush attacks, resistances to all sorts of blunt damage, can go underwater really well. Definitely situationally useful. Just be careful that you actually assign them to a commander and place them somewhere on the battlefield. Otherwise, if they're just in the center, they're going to poison all your other troops and mages. So you just got to be careful with these that they don't end up hurting you more than they hurt the opponent. But still quite useful. Okay, that's an overview of the units. And the last thing I wanted to mention is we do have a few national unique spells. A couple of them are not... like these guys make your units younger, which is very rarely relevant. However, there is one spell that does bear mentioning. It is... I guess we don't have it here because we're in the debug mod. Let me show it to you here in the actual game. It is in... is it in Thaumaturgy? No. Is it Alteration? Evocation. There it is. Evocation. Celestial Chastisement. This is like a better version of Control. Okay, so... or Opposition, is it? Yeah, Opposition. So there's a spell here in Enchantment 6 that I bet most people have not used, which is range 25, precision 100, MR negates 999 damage, only affects magic beings. Okay, so this is a great assassination spell for, I guess thugs that happen to be magic beings, but it is MR negates. However, this is actually pretty decent if you know the opponent is going to be relying on some elemental spam, like especially in the mid game, people tend to go with like, oh, let's get a few air elementals in here, or, spam out a few big elementals. We're going to have astral communions, so it's quite easy to spam out a spell like this. And that actually deals pretty well with magic, with elementals, because they're magic beings. However, we have a national version, sort of, which is Celestial Chastisement, which is even better, in my opinion. So this is range 20, precision 100. This one does 8 armor negating damage. Just straight up. So first of all, that's really good. That's extra good against thugs that happen to be magic beings, like elemental royalty maybe, because it's armor negating damage, right? Thugs are going to tend to have really big armor, so that's already fantastic. Then we have an MR negates enslave instead of a kill. So this is a great spell to have. So honestly, my default script for most of the game on my Communion Masters is whatever. The Communion Master, summon Earth Power, Celestial Chastisement 3 times, right? Because if the opponent is opening up with a wave of elemental summons, especially in like small, kind of medium size skirmishes, they're relying on those elementals to win the battle. This will take care of them. And if there weren't any elemental summon, then you've got like a whatever, Earth 3, Astral 3 Mage. There are very few spells they can cast that are bad options in that situation anyways. So this is a great spell that is a national spell for Tien. And that is it. Okay, so that wraps up our introduction to all of the units that we have at our disposal. And we're going to end the episode here. And in the next episode, I want to sort of talk about what kinds of builds we can do and how we're going to put all these units together, how we're going to come up with a cohesive strategy, and in particular, in this game in particular, how we're going to apply those plans into this very large and what turned out to be a very long game. So that's going to be it for now. I'll see you guys shortly. Take care.